My parents didn't scream, didn't argue, didn't even look ashamed. They just sat across from me and calmly said they would raise my rent unless I became my sister's unpaid nanny. The words landed like a physical blow. I stared at them, half expecting someone to jump up, to yell, to explain that this was insane. But no. They were unervingly composed. Sipping their coffee like this was a casual conversation, like it was reasonable to demand that I give up my evenings and weekends to cater to my younger sister. 4 hours every night, 2 weekends a month. My life, they assumed, could simply be rerouted to suit their convenience. I wanted to laugh, to cry, to throw something, but none of it came. Instead, I felt a cold, simmering clarity start to spread through me. This wasn't about helping family, not really. It was about control. About seeing how far I would bend before snapping. And snapping was not in my nature. But neither was submission. My name is Tessa. I found myself thinking, almost like introducing myself to the version of me that could survive this. I'm 24, paying rent in the apartment my parents pretend they don't notice I maintain. And I'm done being the invisible cog in their perfectly constructed family machine. My sister, sweet in her oblivion, had no idea she was the instrument of their manipulation. As I processed their calm tyranny, my mind kept returning to last night. The quiet, the darkness, the papers I had stumbled upon. What I'd uncovered the night before wasn't just a secret. It was leverage. Evidence of the family's little lies, their casual cruelty, and their assumption that I would always comply. The revelation had left me sleepless, but it had also given me something far more valuable than anger. Clarity. I looked at them, saw the smug certainty in their eyes, and felt a small, steady surge of defiance. They thought this ultimatum would bend me. They thought they could coerce me with money and guilt. But I had learned too much, and for the first time, I understood that compliance had a cost I was no longer willing to pay. So this is it, I said softly, voice steady despite the storm inside. I either give up my evenings and weekends to your convenience, or I pay more to live in a place I call home. Is that right? They nodded, unshaken. Controlled. Eerie. And that's when I realized something crucial. They had no idea I was already planning my exit, or what I'd uncovered the night before. Tessa now fully embodies the calm but determined protagonist vibe. 6 years. That's how long I had been building my little sanctuary in that apartment. Piece by piece, thrift store to boutique, lamp by lamp, shelf by shelf. Every corner reflected decisions I had made, compromises I had chosen, and a life I had carved out for myself. It was mine, or so I thought. That on the surface my family seemed warm, functional, even supportive. But the longer I navigated their world, the more I understood the hierarchy beneath that facade. Serena, my younger sister, always at the center. The golden child, the one whose marriage and kids now made her the unquestioned nucleus of family attention. And then there was me. Tessa, the capable one, the fixer, the one expected to adjust, to yield, to smooth the edges of everyone else's comfort. My opinions mattered less than my compliance. My time, less than my willingness to accommodate. I had swallowed so much for so long that I barely noticed the pattern anymore. Birthdays, holidays, even career milestones. I was applauded, yes, but only for how efficiently I made others' lives easier. It wasn't malice. It was expectation. I had learned to bend without breaking, to nod without resentment, to adjust without complaint. Yet outside the apartment, I had carved my own victories. My career as a financial analyst demanded precision, attention, and foresight, the very qualities my family leaned on but rarely acknowledged. I had fought for promotions, managed complex portfolios, and built stability on my own terms. My apartment was a reflection of that independence. Organized, intentional, and for the first time in my life, fully mine. And still, the warning signs had been there. Weeks before, my mother's messages had started coming more frequently, urgent in tone. "Can you help Serena this weekend? We really need you here tonight." At first, I ignored them, brushing off the unease as typical family demands. But each request chipped away at my autonomy, a subtle reminder that my boundaries were optional in the family's eyes. The thing about swallowing too much for too long is that eventually something catches in your throat. It could be a moment, a word, a glance, but the weight doesn't disappear. It lodges there until you either spit it out or it makes you sick. I didn't know that walking into that house, everything I thought was mine, my space, my plans, my peace, was about to be leveraged against me. To be why the time I stepped into the living room, the tension was almost tangible. My father paced near the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back, each step measured, deliberate. My mother sat upright on the edge of the sofa, rigid as a statue, while Serena twisted her ring nervously, casting glances between us as if unsure which side to align with. The air smelled faintly of coffee and something metallic. Anticipation, I realized. Not a spilled my mother produced a folded sheet of paper from the coffee table as if she'd spent hours preparing it. "We've put together a schedule," she said smoothly, unfolding it with precision. The paper looked innocuous enough, but the lines and columns, the headings and bolded times revealed the plan in all its cold clarity. 4 hours every evening, 2 weekends a month. Hours dedicated entirely to Serena's household needs. Meals, errands, childcare, laundry. The precision made it feel less like a request and more like a contract she expected me to sign without hesitation. I swallowed, steadying my voice. "I have a full-time job. My evenings are not exactly flexible, and weekends." I trailed off, measuring their reaction. "Your job shouldn't come before family," my father said flatly, as if reciting a principle written into the universe. His tone wasn't raised, but it carried the weight of inevitability, the kind of authority that stifles argument before it begins. Serena looked guilty, her lips pressed together. I could see her small protest, the tiny shake of her head, but she didn't speak. Her hesitation felt almost real, almost human, but it didn't stop the trap from snapping. And then my mother delivered the coup de grace, her voice steady, her eyes locking on mine. "If you can't comply, we'll have to adjust your rent." The words were clinical, cold, calculated. Not an angry threat, not a bargaining tactic. They expected compliance without resistance. My stomach knotted, but I forced myself to breathe, to remain outwardly composed. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of panic. Something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly, like a thread pulled too tight for too long. I looked around at the perfectly arranged furniture, at Serena fidgeting with the ring that had always symbolized attention she'd never earned, at my parents' calm faces assuming the power was absolute. "You'll have it," I said softly, voice measured. But it wouldn't be the one they expected. And with that I stood, picked up my bag and left. The paper lay on the coffee table, a monument to their entitlement, but I carried with me something far heavier than their schedule. The knowledge that their control had limits, and that I had discovered exactly where mine began, back in my apartment. I closed the door and let out the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Panic had tried to creep in, the familiar squeeze of fear when family power tried to suffocate my autonomy. But then I opened my lease. Every line, every clause, suddenly illuminated the bluff my parents had been hiding behind. They couldn't raise the rent immediately. They were legally required to give 90 days written notice. Every threat they made a bluff, a manipulation designed to make me bend. For the first time, I felt the tight coil of panic unwind into something sharper, colder. Clarity. Did I read and reread the lease, my mind mapping every loophole, every protection. The anger that had bubbled earlier transformed into methodical precision. This wasn't a fight born from emotion. It was strategy, logistics, execution. If they thought they could control me with threats, I would prove how ineffective that control truly was. The next hours were deliberate. Vacation days were taken without fanfare. Apartment tours scheduled like covert missions. Each viewing was measured, assessing layouts, sunlight, storage. My life rebuilt from the inside out. By Thursday I found it. A small industrial-style loft with exposed brick, wide windows, and enough room to unpack both my life and my quiet revenge. The lease signed, the deposit paid, I felt a satisfaction that had nothing to do with money. It was the reclaiming of space, of control. Packing became an almost ritualistic process. Room by room, item by item, I moved silently, deliberately. Books, kitchenware, clothes, all wrapped and labeled. The apartment gradually emptied without anyone noticing. The living room, once my pride, was now a shell. The bedroom, once my refuge, bare. I drafted the 60-day notice with no emotion, printed it, and left it ready on the counter. Saturday morning came with rain pelting against the windows. The movers arrived, boxes stacked, trucks humming. Each item loaded felt like a step further from manipulation, from control, from the suffocating hierarchy I'd endured for so long. If you've ever had to silently plan your escape from people who thought they controlled you, drop a comment. You're not alone. By the time my parents realized what was happening, I was already gone. The apartment that had been my anchor was now a bridge to freedom. Every threat, every demand, every subtle guilt trip they had attempted had dissolved into the quiet of my strategy executed perfectly. Unseen, unstoppable. My phone lit up before I even finished unpacking my first box. 10 missed calls. Then 16. Then 23. Voicemails stacked one on top of the other, each a frantic plea, demand, or thinly veiled threat. I didn't answer. I didn't even look at the messages. I blocked every number, one by one, until the screen was silent except for the occasional email notification. It wasn't enough. The next morning, a certified letter arrived at my workplace, hand-delivered, stamped in red. I held it in my hands, feeling the familiar pulse of controlled panic rising, but only briefly. I had prepared for this day. An hour later, I was sitting across from Richard Cole, a lawyer recommended by a colleague, who looked at the letter and then at me with calm efficiency. "They have no legal grounds to harass you," he said. "You've got protections in place. Any further attempts at intimidation can and will be met with formal action." His words were measured, almost boring in their clarity, but they carried a weight that made the chaos outside these walls suddenly irrelevant. The calls and letters continued for a day or two, but each one hit the buffer of legal authority. The tone shifted from coercion to desperation. My parents had no way in, and I had made sure of it. Then came the call from Aunt Veronica. Her voice was warm, tinged with a mix of amusement and sympathy. "Tessa," she said, "they finally hired a nanny. Turns out it's costing them more than they ever imagined. And, well, you know how they've been scrambling. They're not handling it well." I allowed myself a small, private smile. The irony wasn't lost on me. Every frantic call, every demand, every attempt at control had only backfired. The hierarchy they tried to enforce, the ultimatums they thought would bend me, they had now bent nothing but themselves. Their fury and embarrassment were real, palpable, and for once, entirely their own burden. And then came the silence. No more calls. No more letters. No more messages trying to manipulate, guilt, or frighten me. The apartment, my sanctuary, remained untouched by their chaos. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, savoring the quiet. Have you ever had to lawyer up against family? Let me know in the comments. These stories need to be heard. But chaos has a way of seeping through cracks. Even when control is regained, the echoes of manipulation linger, reminders of the weight you once carried. I had reclaimed my space, my autonomy, and my peace, but I also knew the story wasn't finished. Something else was coming, and this time I would be ready. The November morning was cold, the kind that seeps into your bones despite the warmth of a coat or scarf. I stepped into the business center, the polished floors reflecting my own apprehension. Lawyers on both sides flanked the room, papers neatly stacked, pens poised. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a reckoning. My parents arrived with the same unsettling calm they had perfected over the years. Their expressions suggested civility, but I knew better. Behind the soft smiles and composed postures was entitlement, the expectation that they could spin reality to suit themselves. My mother tried to soften her tone, I remembered, her words floating toward me. "We simply asked Tessa to support her sister during a difficult time." I didn't flinch. I repeated, voice steady, precise. "And in return, you threatened to raise my rent." The room fell into uncomfortable silence. I could see the flicker of surprise in their eyes, the way their rehearsed defenses faltered when confronted with plain truth. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's hands clenched the edge of her chair. Serena looked down, quiet, as though she suddenly realized she had been a pawn rather than the prize. For the next hour, they tried to frame their actions as misunderstandings, as acts of concern. "We just wanted to help," they said, rehearsed and earnest. I countered each word with clarity. You weaponized rent. You used leverage to force compliance. This isn't about helping anyone. It's about control. Richard Cole, calm as ever, interjected when the conversation began to circle in passive-aggressive traps. No financial threats. No obligations imposed. Any attempt to coerce Tessa further is off the table. His words laid down clear boundaries, backed by the authority of law, and I felt the invisible chains of years begin to loosen. And my father shifted uncomfortably, resisting each point, but gradually, reluctantly, he nodded. My mother's voice cracked as the truth landed, almost apologetic. I didn't realize you felt trapped. I looked her in the eye, steady, unwavering. You just never listened, I said. The memorandum was signed by all parties, every signature a mark of accountability, every clause a shield against future manipulation. The room was quiet once the papers were collected, the tension lingering in the corners like an echo. Serena's eyes met mine briefly, not with blame, but with a small acknowledgement of the truth finally laid bare. If you've ever had to face down family in a room like this, you know how it feels. Share your story below. This wasn't victory. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. Every carefully worded phrase, every boundary reinforced, every acknowledgement forced from them was not about proving power. It was about reclaiming mine. I walked out of that business center carrying not anger, but clarity, and the knowledge that I had rewritten my story on my terms. The first morning in my new apartment felt almost unreal. Sunlight poured through the wide industrial windows, landing on the brick walls and polished wood floors. I held my coffee cup, breathing in the aroma, and for the first time in weeks, my shoulders weren't tense. No subtle glances, no calculated expectations. Just silence, calm, and a space that was fully mine. Returning to work, I noticed the difference immediately. My focus sharpened, decisions came easier, and presentations I had once dreaded felt effortless. The mental energy I had spent navigating manipulations, guilt trips, and ultimatums was finally freed. My career flourished, a quiet but undeniable testament to the autonomy I had fought for. Home. The reminder of their lessons arrived monthly in the form of the nanny's bill, covered entirely by my parents. It was almost poetic. Every dollar a subtle confirmation that their leverage no longer held power over me. Meanwhile, my relationship with Serena began to normalize. Coffee dates became human again, no manipulation, no guilt, just shared laughs and honest conversation. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Dinner with my parents was awkward, yes, but civil. At a neutral restaurant, we navigated conversation carefully. There was no hierarchy, no control. They were my parents, yes, but their entitlement had limits, and I had made that clear. Love without respect is control, I reminded myself, and I refused to accept anything less than respect. I looked around my apartment one evening, sunlight fading into the soft glow of lamps, and reflected on the journey. The ultimatums, the legal letters, the careful preparation. It all led here. A life rebuilt on boundaries and clarity rather than obligation. Healing wasn't complete, and perhaps it never would be entirely, but the foundation had changed. I had reclaimed my space, my peace, and my voice. If you've ever felt cornered by the people who were supposed to protect you, know this. Choosing yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary. If this story resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments and make sure to subscribe. There are more stories ahead, and you don't want to miss the next one. Drop a flexed biceps if you've ever had to choose yourself over family expectations.